Okay. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. There are quite a few people coming in at the same time. We will be starting promptly at 1 o'clock. But in the meantime, if anybody wants to throw in the chat, say hello, welcome, introduce yourselves if you would like, that's completely fine. Again, we'll get started right at 1 o'clock, just opening up early for people to start kind of getting comfortable and situated.
Oh, good. Craig. Yeah.
All right. And again, for everyone that's just joining us, we will be getting started promptly at 1 o'clock in about 2 minutes here. If you would like, you can go ahead and talk to everyone in the chat, introduce yourselves, but we'll get started here again right at 1 o'clock.
Yeah.
Okay, looks like we are officially at 1 o'clock. That's great. I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Lenore, who's going to kind of give us our kickoff, and then I'll introduce our first speaker for today. So, Lenore, whenever you're ready.
Yeah. Well, thank you all for being here. If you do not know me, my name is Dr. Lenore Killam, and I am the interim president of the Illinois Environmental Health Association. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to the first installment of our spring virtual conference for 2026. And I do have a few announcements on behalf of the association to give you this morning. The first is to save the date for our annual education conference. It will be November 3rd and November 4th, 2006 at Starved Rock Lodge. And we need speakers for that conference. We are encouraging everyone or someone you know who you would like to hear to submit an abstract. The call for abstracts will go out this summer, so please look for those. Also, we will have elections opening soon for the IEHA board, and we'll need the following positions: president-elect, treasurer, North chapter, Central chapter, and South chapter directors, and director at large until 2029. So lots of seats to fill. It's an exciting time to be in the organization. We're moving forward. We've made a lot of progress building ourselves internally. Um, so come and join us on the board. And finally, I want to offer, and I hope that you will too, offer congratulations to Justin Dwyer, who has until now moderated these sessions. He has a new position as the National Environmental Health Association Region 6 Regional Vice President. So hooray to him, and I'm very proud, and we all should be. So with that said, I will come back in at the end. and give you a few reminders. So let's start. Let this learning begin.
Thank you so much, Lenore. I do just want to add that for the majority of our presentations, if you have any questions, we have two options. You can add your questions in the chat box, which I see everyone is utilizing to its full extent. Great. Since this is a webinar function, we do also have a Q&A box that you can put your questions in there anonymously if you would prefer. I will try and monitor those questions as they come in and share those with our presenters as well. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Lillian Nabrire from Illinois Extension, and they're going to talk to us about overview of produce safety. So Lillian, whenever you are ready.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
All right. Thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you for having me as a speaker to talk about produce safety. I was invited by Heather. I thought you'd be on the call today. Hi, Heather, if you're there. I got excited. I was like, okay, tell me about the audience. What do they want? I hope I'll share some of what you want today. My name is Lillian Nawire. I'm an extension educator in food safety. I do all things food safety from farm to fork. I do quite a bit of work with farmers, especially those that grow fresh fruits and vegetables. And then I speak and teach about produce safety, food safety, restaurants, consumer food safety, and all of that. So if you have questions on that, you can always reach out. But I work with other people in extension that work with different groups. Glad to be here. It's my first time attending, and I can't wait to learn from all of you. I'll stick around for the next presentation after mine and for the ones to come in the next few days. So I will talk about produce safety today, and I hope I have brought it to meet what your needs are. I'll give us a little bit of a background about food safety or produce safety, and this is mostly going to be a review for most of us on the call. And then I'll cover a little bit about efforts to ensure produce safety on the farm, what the government is doing, or what they hope to do, and how farmers are responding. But in the last third of the presentation, we'll talk about how you may be able to assess whether produce is safe at the market. So before I begin, who wants to tell me what their favorite vegetable or fruit is? You can write in the chat. Actually, pineapple. Yum. Wow. Great. You all love tropical fruits. Okay, I see greens, grapes, peas. Yeah, a variety of these. I love these too. I really like mangoes. The last time I bought mangoes, I got disappointed because they are darkened inside. So I was like, oh no. Anyways, when the season is great, I get good ones. So I will not give up on them. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. Okay. Yes, so it's really important for us to talk about produce safety because of the problem of foodborne illnesses, and produce tends to be one of those foods that carry foodborne pathogens. So we'll spend some time talking about that. Most of what you've shared is actually in this table here. Find my okay. I don't want this one. Please help me delete this. I didn't want that one. I wanted a different one.
I just deleted that for you.
Okay, try not to draw another one. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.
Yes, so I was saying that most of what you've shared has actually been implicated in foodborne disease outbreaks, different fruits and vegetables, and with all the eat healthy information that we have learned in the past couple of years, we are trying to have half of our plate as fruits and vegetables, we all need to be aware of the risks that are involved as we go to the market to buy produce, or even as we help others to eat healthy. We don't want to get sick, we don't want to be hospitalized, and we don't want to die. If there are any farmers on the call, whether you grow produce to sell or you grow produce to feed your family, thank you for doing that. I have confidence that you can do things really well. So produce is kind of tricky because people eat it raw most of the time. We love it in our smoothies, our salads. We love those conveniently, nicely packaged different fruits in the pack. Like my first slide there, I was supposed to apologize for those who had not yet had their lunch, but that was really looking beautiful. So produce is not cooked before eating. So if it's contaminated, consumers will fall sick. We have to be aware of that. On the market, you'll find that sometimes we have minimally processed produce or minimally processed fruits and vegetables. And by that, I mean it has only been either washed and peeled and sliced, washed and cored. There is no kill step. It has not been canned. There's probably no blanching. And the minimal processing that is done to these fresh cut fruits and vegetables does not reduce food safety risks. In fact, it could just be introducing risks, as we shall see in the slides that I will share. Produce is still tricky because it grows out in the farm where all the other potential pathogens could be growing. The spoilage microorganisms are in the environment. And once the contamination gets onto produce, it becomes very difficult to remove that contamination. Think about strawberries. Their skin is tender. If you're asking your producer to wash the strawberries so many times before you hand it to the next person in the supply chain, you may have damaged the skin. So most of these won't be washed that much. Cantaloupe has a rough skin. If contamination gets onto the skin of the cantaloupe, it's going to be hard to get all of it out. So that's why we end up encouraging consumers to use a brush, scrub the surface, that we're not confident that all the consumers will do that. So the farmers on the other end of the spectrum are encouraged to prevent contamination right from the farm, so that by the time the consumer gets the food, at least they have the lowest level of contamination possible. We hope it's zero, but we can't have zero risk. And then lettuce tends to be quite, it's often implicated in outbreaks. You see how those leaves beautifully grow into each other. If a farmer uses contaminated water, it's very hard to remove contamination from between those leaves. Okay, you must be aware of all these hazards, the common hazards in food, biological, chemical, and physical hazards. Sometimes we call them risks, but the biological hazards or risks in this case would be bacteria, viruses, or parasites, and these may be present in manure. On the farm, some farms use manure from cattle, maybe donkey, maybe poultry to put soil amendments in the soil, and if those are not treated, they will be a source of these pathogens. Chemical risks can be pesticides, cleaning agents, sanitizing agents, like what we use on food contact surfaces. And then we can also have pieces of metal, wood, plastic, anything you don't want to see in your salad. Rubber bands, band-aids, people's nails, those extra nails we add on our nails to look beautiful. Those can be physical risks. So those are things that we have to be aware of. So most of the outbreaks in produce are caused by biological risks, the parasites, bacteria, and viruses. And in this graph, I'm trying to show the number of outbreaks that were caused by different pathogens. There's a journal paper there that you can read if you want more details. But just want to draw your attention to norovirus. It's very, very common, especially in the colder months of the year. It's very common. It tends to spread very fast. And so we try to make sure farmers are aware of that. Then we also have things like salmonella, the bacteria. That's very common. E. coli is common because farms use manure from animals, and if it's not treated, that could be a source of contamination. So we talk about these most of the time, just for them to be aware. We know they won't go sampling and testing them out, but we talk about different ways that they may be introduced into the farm and produce. Okay, so bacteria can be encouraged to grow. We can promote growth of bacteria on produce, on food contact surfaces, if we provide a conducive environment. If we provide food, if the pH is right, the neutral pH is often one that encourages growth of foodborne pathogens. When the temperature is right, by right I mean if produce is placed within the temperature danger zone, you're aware of that danger zone. Between 40 to 140, that's the consumer side of what we teach. That temperature promotes growth of bacteria. In fact, bacteria like E. coli will double, their population will double every 20 minutes. That's something very, very shocking. If you're eating produce that is coming from across of the nation, by the time it gets to your plate, we hope that there was no temperature abuse along the journey. We can only hope. Then we have oxygen. Oxygen supports growth of most foodborne pathogens. Then moisture is another very, very good factor that promotes growth of those pathogens. The time factor here is, think about if produce is exposed to all these wonderful conditions and the produce is contaminated, every 20 minutes, bacteria will double in population. Most of these, the farmer is not able to control them. But the next person in the supply chain, like the distributor or the restaurant or the grocery store, has a chance to control some of these. So you can tear them apart and see how well different different players or stakeholders can help reduce contamination. So how does produce get contaminated, or how does contamination spread? From humans. These humans could be working on the farm. They help with harvesting of different kinds of fresh produce. And just so you know, farmers are not required to wear gloves when they're harvesting. Leave that one at that. And if most produce is going to be consumed raw, they're not required to wear gloves, but there are other requirements I'll talk about later. The humans could be involved in providing soil amendments to the ground, and if they don't know the difference between treated and untreated, they may end up using untreated soil amendments, and those can be a source of contamination. Some farms have fields where they grow fresh produce, but they also raise livestock. Maybe they have cattle or they have chickens. And if they're not aware that their livestock enterprises would be a source of a risk to their fresh produce enterprise, that can be very, very tricky because cross-contamination can happen so fast on the farm. And then water can be a source of contamination too. Farms get water from different places. Maybe they have a well that provides water. Maybe they have an open surface water source like a lake, a river, a creek. They can use that for irrigation. Maybe they use city water, or city water can be referred to as the public supply type of water that has very high level of treatment or the lowest risks available. The farmers are free to use any of those sources, but they need to be aware of the risks that they introduce. So that's why they go through training. The other one is equipment and food contact surfaces. This cuts across even after harvest. All that can be a source of contamination. Awareness is the first thing that we make sure people, at least they know the potential sources of contamination. The next few slides, I'll be talking about efforts, current efforts to help ensure produce safety. It may not cover everything, but I try to pull through the common ones we have available. So the first is the Food Safety Modernization Act. This is a regulation, the federal regulation. The Food Safety Modernization Act was signed into law in 2011 by President Barack Obama, and the goal for this FISMA, what for FISMA, is to ensure that we minimize contamination of food, we prevent foodborne illness, we prevent outbreaks, spend much more time and resources preventing, so that we have fewer outbreaks to react to at the end of the day. And since we're talking about produce today, I'll just highlight the produce safety rule. The produce safety rule is the one that targets produce right from the farm where the produce is grown. So we have different requirements within that produce safety rule, and the rules that are centered around the different sources of contamination in the farm. Not all farms are required to follow the rule. Only those farms that are either covered or qualify for an exemption. So farms that make $25,000 or less adjust that for inflation. From 2011, those farms are not covered by the rule. They're not required to follow the rule. Those two need to learn about food safety, because sometimes they take food to schools where infants are going to school, younger kids, and people could still fall sick, but they're not required. One of the requirements in this rule is that the covered farms, those farms that make more than $25,000 adjust for inflation, that those covered farms that have at least one person taking a food safety training, that food safety training must be based on a standardized curriculum. And the Produce Safety Alliance is the one in charge of providing that training. We call it PSA, Produce Safety Alliance Grower Training, based in Cornell. This training is done by all covered farms within the United States. And in Illinois, we have about 3 lead trainers that help to set up or to lead the trainings. We have several trainers that help provide this training, and we have one coming up in April 1st, up in Chicago. It's an intensive training. We have over 7 modules, 8 presentations, and as you can see, we're trying to cover every potential source of contamination on the farm. So most of our attendees are farmers, but they don't have to be farmers. The first time I took the course, I was a student. I was not a farmer. I still do not think I'm a farmer. Anyway, I train farmers. That's what knowledge can do for you. You teach people things that you don't even know. Anyways, the other resource or the other effort is from the USDA Good Agricultural Practices Program. And these USDA GAP audits are voluntary audits. Farmers are not required to get the GAP certification or certificates for their farm. But I know there are several markets that require farmers to have those certificates. So farmers tend to go this route if they want to break into new markets, especially if they want to have to give a big chunk of, say, tomatoes to a supplier who then delivers to different stores. That supplier may require the farm to have GAP certification. This GAP certification is not free. Farmers must renew it every year. And you don't just apply and you get it. You must have a food safety plan. There must be an auditor coming to your farm every year during the growing season to see how well you implement food safety practices on the farm. The previous produce safety rule that I shared, that one is a regulation. If the farm is covered by the rule, that farm has to be inspected. So farms get inspected to try and figure out if they're following the requirements in the rule. With GAP audits, farmers don't have to get it if they don't need to. They're very, very optional. So here at Illinois Extension, we have an online course. We call it Food Safety Planning for Small Farms. This is aimed at making sure even the smallest farms have a chance to learn about produce safety. If they don't want to commit 8 hours a day of a Produce Safety Alliance training, but they want to learn about produce safety, so we have this course here to kind of get them started on their produce safety journey. I've seen several people take that course. In fact, I am in charge of enrolling and making sure people get their certificates. The course is free. Students have taken it, farmers have taken it, home gardeners have taken it, farmers in the Illinois Eats Purchase Assistance Program have also taken the course. So if you're interested, let me know and I'll let you in. Next, we'll talk about produce safety at the market. And before we go further, I just want us to compare the different products we find on the market. On the left here, I have cantaloupe, whole as it is, but it could be a bunch of kale or maybe a bunch of lettuce. And that I call it whole uncut produce. If you find this produce on the market, I think that the risks are much lower because the produce is intact. The outer layer has not been damaged. I don't want to use the word damaging. It has not been cut. The edible parts are still inside. They're kind of covered from any potential contamination. So the risks with that one are much lower. On the other side, when you find fresh cut produce, this is often minimally processed. It may be diced, chopped, peeled, whichever way makes it convenient for people to eat fresh produce. So that minimal processing tends to introduce risks because one, it cuts off the outside protective layer, it exposes the edible part. And if the environment is contaminated, now we'll have more contamination within the produce. And as we cut the produce, the juices that have those nutrients, the sugars, those things that the microbes like, that becomes much more accessible to the pathogens and the spoilage microorganisms. So if I was an inspector and I was given a few minutes to go check out a grocery store and see how their produce safety situation is, where they're at, the status, I would spend more time looking at the fresh cut produce. Okay. So when you go out to look for how people are handling produce safely or not, and you're checking out the whole uncut fresh produce, I think you take time looking at the display and check and make sure that the displayed produce is not damaged. By damaging, I mean it may be bruised, but sometimes the bruises are so bad that the produce is starting to rot, so that probably is not a good idea to have that displayed on the market. Produce should not be on the floor, even if they're going to peel it. Some people mishandle produce that is going to be peeled in the sense that after all it's protected, they're going to peel it, but that should not be on the floor either. It should be away from the walls because we are trying to make sure that pests don't get into the produce. It still needs to be protected. We need to prevent contamination from raw meats, raw poultry, and raw food. Another interesting thing I learned in the last couple of years is to think about produce that drops on the ground. I would ask about what policies they have. What happens to produce if it drops on the ground in the store? You know, sometimes as consumers, we want to reach out to the biggest apple that is there, or maybe the most beautiful bunch of carrots. And in the process, we may accidentally drop some of the produce items. So those things that drop on the ground, what happens to them? Do they put them back? Do they throw them in the bin? Are there risks involved? This is a question that I wanted to ask. I don't know if I'll have anyone telling me what they think. Okay. What do you think? What happens to produce if it drops on the ground? Do you think it picks up contamination? Do you think it does not pick up contamination? I'm going to say it depends. What would your answer be? Okay, someone says it picks up contamination. Yes, depends. 5-second rule, just kidding. I think it would pick up. Yeah, okay. Hold on to those answers. We're going to break this down a little bit more. And the ones that you didn't You didn't type in the chat. Okay, so a few years ago, where I went to school, we did a study, research study, and experiment, and we were trying to answer the same question. So what we did, we got 3 different produce items, peach, apple, and lettuce, and we dropped them from about 1 meter distance from the floor. We dropped them on the ground. The ground was either the tile or carpet. The ground was contaminated with listeria. We put the contamination there ourselves. So we contaminated it with listeria monocytogenes. Then we dropped peach, apple, and lettuce. We let it sit there for either 5 seconds, 1 minute, 10 minutes, 1 hour, and 4 hours. And then we picked the produce and we went and tried to find out how much contamination that produce item has picked up from the surface. And this is what we found out. We found out that all the 3 produce items that we used in the study, they picked up contamination from both of the surfaces. The apple has a small skin. You would think it would pick up very small. Yes, it did on the tile, but when it came to the carpet, we had like 6.95% of the apples picking up contamination. Lettuce, as we shared earlier, the leaves, they kind of have several bumps in them, and sometimes they come with moisture because they spray them with moisture in the store. And that kind of contributes to this much higher percentage of pickup. And then the peach can also pick up from the different surfaces. So those were 3 that we tested, but it could happen to any other type of produce. And then we wondered whether time had an importance or whether it would influence the pickup results. And yes, part of our brain was thinking about the 5-second rule. So we had the 5 seconds included within the time that we were studying. And it turns out the 5 seconds, at 5 seconds, produce had the highest pickup. That was very different from what we expected. We thought we would have less, because since the thing drops, you pick it up, you shouldn't have picked up any microorganism. It turns out at 5 seconds, we had 25% pickup from the carpet. Tile had much, much less. 1 minute, we had about 10%. And at 4 hours, we had like 3.67%. So it seems the longer the produce stays on the ground, if that ground is carpet, the less it picks up. I'm not trying to encourage people to keep dropping their produce and leaving it on the ground, because you don't know what else may be happening. Someone may walk around and step on it. It may be a much more contaminated ground. In fact, we just encourage people to not put back produce in the shelf. Put it in the bin, maybe take it to compost it, regardless of what type of surface it is. The risks are high. And if I found produce dropped on the ground, I would highly, highly encourage the manager to have a policy to throw that produce away into maybe the compost bin or something. Because yes, contamination can be picked up. Okay, let's switch gears here and talk about fresh cut produce. This has to be treated as you're ready to eat food, because they're not going to cook it. And since it's a highly perishable product, it's important that we keep it displayed at either 40 or below. It can be frozen, that's fine. If it's not frozen, it should be at 40 degrees or below. We have to make sure the produce is not in contact with raw meats, poultry, or seafood. There should be no molds, no pests, because those carry their own pathogens with them. If the store makes or packages its own produce, if they peel the cantaloupe within the store and then package it there, I would spend more time inspecting the area where the produce is prepared and try to observe how things are done. Again, I don't know how much time you spend when you go out to check out all these places, but if I had more time, I would spend more time there. And if I had the wisdom to know when they do the preparation, I would come during that time so that I see things happening. What goes into that package is very, very important. Some of it doesn't get to be seen. So during the inspection, I would check the areas where the produce is received, where produce is stored, where produce is processed or inspected, those areas where produce is displayed. I will try to look at the employees as well and probably talk to them. I don't know what you are allowed to do or not to do, but we could learn a lot from them. So during receiving, storage, and display, I would make sure to check if they're checking the temperature. Do they check the temperature of produce at the point of when they receive the produce, especially for the fresh cut produce? Do they check the temperature? If the produce temperature has been abused during transportation, do they reject the do they reject the packages and have the whoever is giving them to display take those back, because we don't know how long the produce has been in the temperature danger zone. Do they have a thermometer? That is very, very important. Is the thermometer calibrated? How quickly do they move produce to storage, especially the fresh cut produce? Because that must be stored at 41 or below. In the place where they store the produce, how do they store the produce in relation to all the other foods around? Is produce on the top shelves, or is it separated from the raw meats, raw poultry, raw anything, especially that needs to be cooked? It needs to be away and at least to minimize cross-contamination. If the store or the business is limited on space, the risk of cross-contamination is high. So I would look more at how they are preventing cross-contamination. And then again, I would check to make sure the storage areas, the display areas are clean. Sometimes people just bring the containers or the packaged goods and place them there and they don't clean. That's may end up in, attracting pests, and those will be a source of contamination too. Produce in storage, has it been labeled with a date to help them rotate produce very well, at least so they don't have a lot of produce to waste at the end of the day? And since some of them want to make the most money, there's a risk they may just wash off the not looking great type of thing with maybe a mold or slime. So I would encourage them to put the dates on. That will help them to not have to throw away a ton of produce. And then I want to make sure that there are no chemicals in the same storage area as the food. So the way you would protect other foods, these two need to be protected from chemical risks. And then the areas where they do the processing and production, where they peel and cut, chop the produce, I would observe to check if produce is washed before preparing. In the first few slides, we talked about the different sources of contamination on the farm. So the washing off of the soil can help reduce the risks to some extent. So washing produce is very, very critical. I'll check and see if the employees wash their hands before preparing produce, before wearing gloves. If you're not able to see these, you may have a conversation with the manager and ask about their policies. They may tell you some of what happens when you're not present. Okay. And then, since we're talking about washing fresh produce, I hope that the stores know that produce must not be washed in the same sink as the hand washing sink. We don't want fresh produce to pick up contamination from the sink. Because as you wash your hands, whatever wastewater goes into the sink, that water is contaminated. So now if you put your produce and you don't wash it very well, you're picking up contamination. So that is very, very important for them to be aware of. And then how do they chop their produce? How do they handle the produce? Do they wear gloves or do they use utensils? This is ready to eat food. They must not be touching it directly, especially for the fresh cut produce. So being aware of all of that is very important. I would check to see if they have their hairs covered, their beards covered. look at their hands. Do they have jewelry that is beyond the wedding band? Do they have jewelry that cannot be cleaned? And whether it's on the ears or the hands, it can easily fall into the whatever they're packing or processing, and that may end up becoming a field policy. I'd look at the preparation area, the different surfaces close to or relatively close to the tables where they're cutting produce from. So the tables, the utensils, the floors, the walls, is there a risk that produce could become contaminated? Maybe it's from condensation and there's a pipe running over that keeps dripping onto the surface where produce gets prepared. I'll check for things like that. Do they have enough light? If light is not enough, you may not be able to see a pest that is trying to run into the produce. So they need enough lighting to help them see what they're doing. That light needs to be shatterproof. If it breaks, those particles or pieces of the light should not get into the fresh cut produce. Think about those packing containers before they use them. Do they inspect them? Sometimes the packing containers can break and become a source of physical hazard. So inspecting those containers is very, very important. Physical hazards could also result from the nails that I talked about earlier. Those nails, are they short? Have they been cut? Because if they're long and they're the artificial ones, if they fall into the food, that can be a big source of a problem if someone consumes them. And my last slide here for things for you to look out for are asking to find out if employees are trained. I think after observing, you may end up having your own conclusion about whether or not they're trained or they need to be trained more. Training is very important. This is where employees will learn about the importance of hygiene and health and food safety and why they should care. Because at this point, they'll be the last line of defense with these ready-to-eat foods, because consumers don't know what goes into that package. All they see is the fruit. I would ask about policies that restrict sick employees from working with fresh produce. We know if they have jaundice or if they've been taking care of someone that had a foodborne illness, there's a risk that they too could be sick. If they have diarrhea, if they're vomiting. So a policy that restricts sick employees from coming in contact with ready-to-eat food or even food prep areas is very important in this case. I would walk to the hand washing station and check if they have the resources or supplies they need: soap, single-use towels, trash cans. It's one thing to tell them to wash hands. It's another for them to do it well. If they don't have resources, they may not have the confidence to ask for those resources. So working with a manager and observing what happens on the ground can help us learn more about how they protect produce from becoming contaminated. I want to thank you all for listening and for all that you do for Illinois and all of us. Thank you for protecting us from becoming sick. We will all do our part. The educators will teach. Inspectors can go find out what people are doing. Please give us that feedback because it helps us to craft our presentations and trainings in a way that best helps people who provide us with those services. At this point, I will take questions and comments that you may have.
Yeah, Lillian, it looks like we have a couple of questions. First one here. I have a grocery store that has uncut produce on carts and stands, but they seem to have a lot of issues with flies or fruit flies. I told them to rotate stock more often, but is there any other advice or ways to deal with pest control and uncut produce?
Well, I wish I had a pest control company because that can really help in some areas. People can be overwhelmed. Since there are flies, sometimes I've seen people using screens, like net-like screens to kind of keep the flies out. But if the fly is too small and it can go through the holes of the screen, that can be a little bit tricky. I don't know the name of the like sticky things you can put on the wall to kind of attract, and the fly will get stuck on there, then they won't come out. Sometimes you use traps. All those can help, but maybe they haven't had success with them. So talking to a pest control company may be of help. And as you keep those questions coming, please give us some feedback. We may improve how we deliver this information to other people. Yes, keep the
Excellent.
questions coming.
All right. Next question. Before produce items were dropped on the ground, were the items swabbed for presence of listeria to establish a baseline?
Yes, yes. And in fact, we had controls that were dropped on the surface where we didn't add listeria. Yeah, we had controls, and the produce were swabbed with, when you use a certain percentage of ethanol to kind of wipe off whatever may be present.
Okay.
Yes.
Excellent. Next question. What about the water systems that spray fruit? Should these be cleaned or flushed out?
Yes, they should be cleaned. I don't know what they add to the water. I would be interested in learning about what they add to the water. Yes, they should be clean. They should be flushed out. They could clog, and if contamination gets into that system, we talked about moisture as one of the factors that promotes growth of microorganisms. So the risks can be introduced in that way. The ice machines, at first I didn't think they would be an issue until one time I was searching on that topic, and I learned that those places can get moldy really quickly. They can get slimy. So every once in a while, probably regularly, yes, even the vessels that hold water that looks very clean can get contaminated. So having a schedule to clean those out can be very helpful.
Okay. Awesome. And then someone had said many grocery stores have a water filtration system that introduces low levels of chlorine to prevent mold and bacterial growth on the produce in the spray section.
Yeah,
Excellent.
thank you for sharing that. Yes.
And should a customer be concerned about apparent fingernail marks in the produce?
Well, yes, fingernail marks. The nails can carry foodborne pathogens. I would be concerned if I was a customer or consumer. Yes, they should be concerned. Well, I'm now telling them to put them back and pick another produce item, but maybe that's bad manners for food waste. I don't know. They should be concerned.
And I think there's just one in the chat here. Do the waxes that they sometimes coat apples with have antimicrobial properties? I'm wondering if that could explain why the amount of bacteria went down the longer the apple stayed on the floor.
Hmm. I do not know if they do have. Probably they do, probably not. I know one of the reasons they use the wax is to prevent the moisture from leaving the apple, so it stays crunchy for the longest time possible. Yes, that may explain if there are any antimicrobial substances in the wax. That may explain it. But the other part that would explain that is the microorganisms, when you leave them in an environment and as they dry out, with the air going over the microbes over time, they can dry out, and that affects their survival rate. There is the concept we let farmers use on the farm, microbial die-off. If the farmer has water that they have not tested to see the level of generic E. coli in it, they can use that water. If it looks clean, it doesn't smell bad, they can use it to irrigate produce. But they need to have a longer interval between the last time of irrigating produce to harvest. So within maybe 4 days, 4 days before harvest, that's when the microorganisms die. So that could be one of the reasons why the numbers were dropping over time.
Okay. And I don't see any more questions in the chat or Q&A. Does anyone else have any other questions for Lillian? I'm not seeing anything come in. But Lillian, thank you so much for presenting for us today. I definitely learned something as I'm listening and taking in. And if anyone is free, if you could also please go ahead and fill that evaluation out for Lillian before she takes down her slides. It looks like we ended just a little early, which is completely fine.
Mhm.
So we'll go ahead and take a small break, and then we'll come back immediately at 2 o'clock to go ahead and kick things off with Jeffrey and his presentation. Thank you all so much. Thank you again, Lillian, and I'll see everyone here back at 2 o'clock.
Thank you. And please reach out if you have questions for your safety. We can always help.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, so we're going to go ahead and turn things over to Jeffrey Havens, who's going to talk to us about homemade food consumer protection. So Jeffrey, I see your slides are up, so I'm going to turn everything completely over to you.
Okay, can you hear me first?
Yes, I can hear you.
Terrific. Okay, this afternoon I'm going to be talking about, as Arnie was just saying, homemade food and consumer protection. And the title of this presentation is Local Law Litigation. And it basically, like I said, it comes down to how much consumer protection do you need for high-risk homemade foods. And I was working for the Montana Department of Health for a decade. And I'll get into some of that here on the next slide. But anyway, that's a little introduction. Some background information about myself. I've basically had 3 different careers, one in public health, specifically environmental health. And then I was a high school science teacher and also did investigative news journalism in Rockford, Illinois. And that's a whole, that was a whole different adventure. So anyway, the presentation for this has to do with, going up to like a 30,000-foot view. What is a just law and what is an unjust law? And that's just a question that I'll just throw out there to let you think about as we're going through the presentation here. But as far as like a just law, basically, in my mind, it comes down to equal rights and equal protections. And unjust laws, they compel certain groups to follow the rules, but those rules don't necessarily apply to others. And that's what I would consider an unjust law. And that's just not me. That's widely regarded as a idiom in law. And just to give you an idea of my background, I am not an attorney, and I don't even play one on TV. But in this particular circumstance, I thought it was an important topic enough to pursue this, what in legal parlance is called pro se. So it's an old Latin term for, doing it yourself. And out in Montana, we didn't have a whole lot of attorneys, at least trustworthy attorneys, that I could give that trust to be able to carry out this public health mission. And so in this presentation, I will make the argument that we've got two different laws for homemade food, for commercial homemade foods. One is I would consider just, and the other one is unjust. And the reason why is because the just law is securely based on reasonable consumer protections, where the latter is based on the absence of reasonable consumer protections. And really that's what it comes down to, is what's reasonable and what's completely absent. And later on in the presentation here, I'll get into some of the more details. And if anybody wants to interrupt to ask questions, you're more than happy to, especially if I'm moving too fast. But I'll go back to what I consider the beginning, and that is, what is the food freedom movement? And the answer to that is, in its most extreme form, the homemade foods sold in the state have no consumer protections. And this is the circumstance that we have currently in Montana. But there's a big difference, because we've also have another law that's out there, and that's the cottage food movement. And the cottage food movement is based on with consumer protections. So we've got two different laws, one absent consumer protections and one with consumer protections. And this means we've got two very, very different and unequal homemade food laws in Montana. One is part of the regulatory process that I was a part of back in 2013 through 2015, and the food freedom movement, which has origins back to 2011. I'll get into that pretty soon. But anyway, the cottage food law that's in existence now, that was enacted in 2015. And then the food freedom movement, at least the current food freedom movement in Montana, came into existence in 2021. And the difference between the two is, and I'm sorry, I've got to get into a little bit of politics, but the cottage food movement that was enacted in 2015, that was signed or sponsored by a Democrat and signed by a Democratic governor. And then in 2021, the politics changed, and the food freedom law was signed by sponsored by a Republican, and then signed by a Republican governor. And that dynamic hasn't changed. Okay, so as far as like a national level, as far back as I could go, from what I gathered, is in 2011, on January 4th, 2011, President Barack Obama, he signed the Food Safety and Modernization Act. And that included, prevention measures. Instead of focusing and reacting to foodborne illnesses, it was supposed to help emphasize prevention rather than just responding to foodborne illnesses. And you saw that in some of the last presentation with the produce safety, measures that have been enacted around the country. And that's part of the Food Safety and Modernization Act that was signed in 2011. And so in response to that, on February 2nd, 2011, the Montana Food Freedom Act was introduced by a Republican legislator named Tom Burnett of Bozeman. And the bill asked the legislature to declare all federal commercial foods laws invalid and rejected in Montana. So, and that presents a lot of problems. And without going too far into the weeds, it comes down to interstate commerce and intrastate commerce. That is food that's grown within a certain state and it's only sold within a certain state. But then you get into some ingredients and there's mixtures of interstate ingredients in an intrastate product. And I won't go into the weeds unless somebody wants me to. But anyway, just keep in the back of your mind, there's interstate commerce and intrastate commerce. One goes across state lines, the other one stays within the borders of a particular state. And that's just some of the legal parlance that you have to know when you're going through litigation processes. So the question is, why do we even regulate high-risk canned foods? And we're not talking about like jams and jellies, something with a real low water activity. Might have a high moisture content, but a low water activity, such as, some of the jellies and jams that are out there. But the high risk canned foods, which I consider what I would say low acid canned foods and acidified foods, it's to prevent needless death and suffering. In the case of these high risk canned foods, to prevent botulinum toxin deaths and illnesses. And Food Safety News had a real good publication last week about a woman in Brazil who went to an unlicensed vendor and ended up getting botulism from a pesto sauce that she had bought from a unlicensed vendor. But anyway, that's a side story. I won't go into too much detail unless you want me to. But what it amounts to is 1 tablespoon of purified toxin is enough to kill all human beings on the earth. And that's a pretty potent toxin. So anyway, that's why we don't have high risk canned foods allowed in cottage foods unless there's cooperation between the operator and the local health authorities to make sure that measures have been taken to grant the variance. And I can go over some of that on the last slide that I've got in here. I'll keep moving on. And like I said, if I'm moving too fast, just let me know. A little background history about where canning food came from. It was of military interest to both the United States Army and the French Army. But even going back further than that, if you look at some of the voyages over the oceans, the British, they came up with a recipe to boil down some of the nutrients, and then they would basically lower the water activity of that particular item and then boil it while they're on ships. But anyway, the point being is that in 1782, the canning food was of military interest to both United States and French Army. And then in 1805, the Lewis and Clark expedition, they resorted to eating this canned portable soup in the Bitterroot Mountains when they found food and water scarce. And they mixed that nutrient base with snow, and then they boiled it in an iron pot. And the best way I can compare this portable soup that they had, or what they called it, was it was sort of like a beef bouillon cube would be now. So if you went to the store to buy a beef bouillon cube, that would be similar to what they had. But basically, they probably had the water activity level down low enough where it wouldn't pose a problem. But then it becomes an issue how they stored it. But they had 32 canisters, and they put them in glass jars and corked them. And anyway, so I'm not sure how well it kept during that voyage, but anyway, it got them through the mountains. And then in 1812, you had the first American canning factory opening. And I don't know much about that particular canning factory, so I can't give you any real details on that because I don't know much about that particular topic. But anyway, so that's some ancient history on some canning. More recently, and this is pretty tragic, I pulled this off the USDA's website in December. And on February 5th of 1931, 12 people were reported dead in a North Dakota farmhouse gathering. And after looking at the news reports, it was pretty obvious to me that the biggest suspect of this particular foodborne illness outbreak was the home canned peas. And was advertised or reported in one of the news articles that are on this particular page that are up there, that's up there. So anyway, we're trying to prevent botulism deaths is what it comes down to, and illnesses. And if that antitoxin isn't given pretty much, within a day or two, there's not much hope for recovery. But I'm not a expert in medical issues of that type. But anyway, going back to the evolution of this particular bill, the Food Freedom Bill, I was part of this effort starting in 2012, but in 2013, there was the Montana's version of the Food Modernization Act. And that was in March of 2013. And then in April of 2013, that actually became law. And so over the next couple years, I worked with a number of groups to try to gather as much information about what was needed and still provide consumers with enough protection where they would minimize any harm that might be done by having people consume homemade foods. So that was in 2015. And then later on, that was January of 2015. Then later on in March of 2015, Wyoming enacted their version of Montana's Food Freedom Act. And so it was similar to the 2011 Montana bill. And then they expanded that same law in 2017, 2020, and 2021. And the Wyoming Food Freedom Act has no standards or consumer protections and allows homemade food products to be sold by third-party vendors. And I could make a crude commentary on what that means, but I'll refrain right now just because I want to get through the presentation here. And by July of 2022, Wyoming, North Dakota, Montana, Utah, Iowa, and Oklahoma, they all had versions of a food freedom bill. So definitely picked up steam. So then 2015 rolled around, and what the new bill said, okay, we've got the information, and I helped gather that about what needed to be done to allow safe homemade food products into intrastate commerce. And that's where we came up with the cottage food regulation, and it allows the sale of low-risk homemade foods. But I can tell you, when I was writing up the actual rules that apply to this, there is a provision in that that the rules to allow for high risk. If anyone wanted to introduce low acid canned foods or acidified foods into commerce, interstate commerce, they could do that, but they would just have to go through some of the provisions that are in chapters 3 and 8 of the model food code, the model federal food code. And I've got a description of that on the very last slide here. But anyway, going back to 2013 through 2019, I worked as a state official to update both the wholesale food and the retail food regulations, in addition to updating the commercial food standards for any products that were going out of state. And I'm pretty sure your state probably has something very similar. Okay, so that's 2019. All right, so going to 2017. So this is the second version of Montana's Food Freedom Act. And they just rebranded it and renamed it the Montana Local Food Choice Act, because I'm sure it probably had a little more romantic ring to it, as far as or being able to market it better, I guess. So they renamed it the Montana Local Food Choice Act, but it's still the Montana Food Freedom Act is what it is. It's just a law by a different name. And that bill was sponsored by Representative Greg Hertz. And again, like I say, just the Food Freedom Act with a different name. And that was 2017, and the bill died. But then it didn't go away. It came back and for the next legislative session in 2019. So in late December of 2018, Senator Hertz, now he's a senator, he introduced the same bill, and then it died in the drafting process in 2019. But it didn't go away even in 2020. Then it got backing from the Americans for Prosperity, and they posted up on their website some information about raw milk, and they wanted to, what they said, address the cronyism in the current system to increase opportunity in this sector of our economy, from ending a ban on raw milk to expanding commerce rights to sell goods to willing buyers. And if you know anything about Americans for Prosperity, they are considered a conservative political advocacy group that was founded in 2004 by the billionaire brothers Charles Koch and David Koch. And anyway, they're libertarians, and don't necessarily have anything against them, but they just are advocating against public health, in my opinion. Okay, so then that was in 2020 or late 2020, and then in early 2021, the Local Food Choice Act comes back again for the third time, and it basically mirrors what Wyoming's 2020 version of the same bill, and not unlike the 2011 bill that was introduced in February of that year. And then it actually became law after it was signed by Governor Gianforte. And the law basically prohibits all conventional consumer safety provisions for commercial food and forbids all state and local governments from utilizing existing commercial food protections on behalf of consumers. So not only are they saying, the state can't do anything about it, but they're saying, well, the local health departments, they can't have protections for consumers either. So that was in April of, so the bill is enacted in April, and within days of that act being commenced, we started getting epidemiological information regarding human illness cases, and ultimately it was linked up with a Campylobacter jejuni outbreak to raw milk. And so in October of that same year, I led an on-site investigation team to the site and wrote up the final report and issued that in November, a couple of weeks later. And the interesting part about that is when we were collecting samples, I was trying to collect samples from a couple of different sites, and just to make sure that that we got all the samples we needed, I had one of the sanitarians get a rectal swab from Molly the cow, and that particular cow conclusively linked the outbreak to the human female case A, and the genetic allele difference between case A and the cow was only 71, and that's out of who knows how many alleles, but it's estimated to be in the hundreds. But anyway, there are provisions when you're taking samples like that to because Campylobacter is a sensitive organism, so had to drop the pH of that particular specimen before we transported it, to make sure that we had a proper chain of command and proper techniques to make sure if it was challenged in court that it would still hold up. So anyway, that was from June 2021 to November of 2021. Okay, so fast forward a couple months later, in March of 2022, I thought if you literally read the Montana Local Food Choice Act, you could defecate and urinate into a glass jar or metal container, but you could can it and you could sell it, and you could call it, nature's finest recycled foods. And that's the grotesque thing about it, but it's the truth. If you read it literally, you could do that. And because I had a little bit of background in drugs, dietary supplements, and alcohol products, I said, well, we've got to draw the line somewhere. At least we've got existing rules on those particular items. So we need to issue a guidance policy for this, and just at least limit it to say, okay, the Local Food Choice Act does not apply to homemade drugs, homemade dietary supplements, and homemade alcohol products. Those will still be held up to the same standards. And I was able to persuade the department attorney to go along with that. And to this day, that particular guidance document is still up on the web. unless they've taken it down since the last time I checked. But okay, so more current history. So going to December of 2023, I file a pro se legal complaint, and that means, without an attorney. So I'm acting as my own attorney to challenge the constitutionality of the Montana Local Food Choice Act. And the case went on between me sending notices and then the state sending me notices, and the district court ordered dismissal of the case with prejudice based on individual standing in October of 2025. And part of that was my fault, just because there were some other events that happened in 2024 about a climate change case that got national attention. And that kind of changed the landscape for me, and not just the climate change litigants, which were all youth, because if you read into it, you could say public interest standing. If you can make a case for that, you have public interest standing, you can gain that conference to an unharmed individual. Because if you think about it, and this happened to me yesterday, I had the Supreme Court just sent me a notice yesterday, and the state responded saying basically that for me to confer standing, and this is my interpretation of what they wrote, for me to confer standing, I would have to come up down with botulism from a vendor to confer standing, which makes no sense. And that would be the individual standing anyway. So the bottom line is, in 2026, in Montana, you've got individual standing, taxpayer standing, and public interest standing. And like I said, my case was thrown out on individual standing, and the state is arguing that I basically need to come down with botulism to gain standing, which makes no sense. But that's an issue I want to be arguing later. So what I did with this particular case is I took that environmental health and climate change case, and I used the Supreme Court's own reasoning and reworded it to confer public interest standing. And specifically, in part one, I argue that to deny standing to a person who is in fact uninjured merely through his professional and primary occupation at the time this case was filed, combined with undergraduate and graduate educations, state and national professional registrations, and advanced commercial food safety schooling, simply because he wished many others to also remain uninjured, would mean the most injurious and widespread governmental actions could be questioned by nobody, especially when one considers the very mission of public health is prevention whenever it's practically possible. And at the very bottom here, I've got the case status, and it was just updated yesterday with some information that is worth taking a look at. But anyway, that's my standing argument, using the Supreme Court's own words and reasoning, and we'll see how it turns out. And to buttress that argument, I created this Venn diagram to pictorially convey to the Supreme Court what the relationships are between climate change, environmental health, individual human health, and public health. And I think it's a useful tool to communicate. So that's why I created it for this. And with that, I'm pretty much done. I guess what I will do it right now is just kind of go back a little bit and explain that when I wrote the cottage food rules, I included a provision in there where the Montana Local Food Choice Act is to me, at least for acidified foods and low acid canned foods, it was unnecessary because I already wrote in there that it's possible, but they would just need to be more regulated than other products. So with that, I guess I would just open it up for any questions if anybody has any.
Okay, we do have a couple here. Are there any expanding efforts in Montana to push education on the dangers of consuming raw milk?
Um, Not that I'm aware of.
Mhm. Okay.
I mean, obviously there should be, but I've had some communications with some of the like I mentioned Kathleen Williams, one of the sponsors of two the 2013 and the 2015 bills, and anyway, she's going back into she's a candidate again after taking 6 years off. But I've had some contact with her as far as um, uh, conveying some of like the raw milk outbreak that you're just talking about. But the current political climate is not real conducive to getting those types of messages out.
And in the chat, it looks like, does the state employ any field inspectors at all?
Uh, I mean, yes, I mean, I can tell you for sure because I was one of them at one time. Whether they've eliminated them, I don't know. Because I was doing contract work for the FDA going around the state. But you know, I left their employment in 2022, so I'm not sure what's happened since then. Um, so you know, I guess I don't have a good answer to that, but I used to be one of them because I used to do FDA inspections for contract work.
Excellent.
And as
Oh,
far as like, you know, uh, everything's pretty much local in the state, but there are a few state inspectors, very few.
okay. Excellent. Was the idea to get rid of inspectors since they couldn't inspect any food facilities?
Well, I guess the idea being Montana had more of a philosophy to focus on local, and so they just are more reliant on the local health inspectors to conduct the at least the retail end of it, the retail end of the inspections. As far as like wholesale, they've got the authority to go in there to do inspections, but that's not a real priority, or it hasn't been in the past anyway.
Mm. Do you have any suggestions on how cottage food law can become more strict, It seems like it's becoming easier for people to produce more hazardous foods via cottage food, more TCS items, higher water activity, etc.
I thought my personal opinion is I thought the 2013 model food code that the feds had put out was really good. And like I said, under chapters 8 and 3, there's provisions in there for um, tightening up restrictions. But the cottage food law that came out in the model code, I thought was really good. And then, like I said, I put in some exceptions in there if they complied with some of the parts in 8 and 3. So as the cottage food law was written and the rules were written in Montana, those high risk products aren't allowed unless, like I said, unless they can prove and work with the local health authorities to justify the variance.
All right, another question that's just come in. Do you see cottage food law expanding to allow more foods to be made at home? When does expanding these cottage food laws to the public limit consumer protections?
Yeah, like you said, the variance procedures in place for high risk products, if they can justify and why it's not necessarily why it's needed, but they can justify producing a safe product to the public. I don't know if that answers the question, but I think that I've kind of addressed that. There's the blanket is that it's got to be a low risk food product. And then if you want to introduce a high risk product, that's possible. You just have to work with the local health authorities to get that out into interstate commerce. The problem with the Montana Local Food Choice Act is it sets up two different levels. One has consumer protections, which is the cottage food, and the Montana Local Food Choice Act, which is food freedom, has zero consumer protections. I mean, none. You can put anything out there. And so that's where the unequal protections come in. You know, and I even narrowed it down to, what's a reasonable consumer protection and what's an unreasonable consumer protection. And when you have no consumer protections, to me, that makes the law unjust. And you've got a two-tiered system out there right now.
All right. Oh, a couple more questions coming in. Have insurance companies had a say in covering or not covering damages related to a mishap in a cottage food product? Do cottage food vendors not worry about legal protections or lawsuits, as well as general safety of their customers?
It's a real good question. And the short answer is I don't know, because I've been out of the loop with the state, or what the state has been doing since 2022. So I honestly don't know. But I would think that the insurance companies would have something to say about that. I'm not a product liability lawyer, but I would think that would be something of concern for producers, but apparently not. At least not that I'm aware of.
And
But
then,
yeah, that's a really good question. But if I, just looking at it from a legal standpoint, if I'm a product liability lawyer and I say, look, the law, the Montana Local Food Choice Act lets me produce anything I want to. It says it, that there's no regulations, and it was produced under that. The big problem with that is that there's supposed to be some sort of notification with that law, but it's arbitrary, capricious, vague, nondescript, and I forget the exact part of the law, but it's so hollow that it's meaningless for consumers. So if you go out to a farmer's market, you might be able to tell, well, you should be able to tell easily which products have been produced under the cottage food law and which products were produced or not produced under the cottage food law.
All right. And then a comment here, I'm going to guess that there's plenty of tort reform in the state of Montana.
Again, I'm not tapped into the tort provision laws out here, so but it's a good question.
Excellent, excellent. All right. Do we have any other questions? I didn't see anything else in the chat or Q&A. All right. If we don't have any other questions, Jeffrey, thank you again for your presentation. Again, I'm learning lots of stuff today. You know, my background is not environmental health, so it's always fun coming into this side of kind of public health. So I really appreciate you sharing with us today. Thank
I
you
just
all for your questions. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Someone.
I just wanted to thank everybody for participating and listening. I know I'm not a great orator, but I tried.
No, you did great. You did great. No, this is really nice. And then I did see in the chat that for anyone that was looking for Jeffrey's slides, that they were emailed out yesterday. And if you didn't receive a copy, to email office@iehaonline.org. That is in the chat if anyone needs to scroll back up. So with that being said, we get another little break here. That's great. We get about 15 minutes before our final presentation for today. So I'll pause the recording here and kick us back up at 3 p.m. Thank you again, everyone, and I'll see you back at 3. All right. So for our last presentation today, we have Katie and Anna that are going to talk to us about larvicide training. Katie, whenever you're ready, you can go ahead and pull up your slides.
All right.
Good to go.
Okay. Okay, can you still hear us?
Yes.
All right. I'm going to turn it over to Anna. She's going to do the first portion of our presentation, and she'll do the introductions for our program.
Hello, everyone. So this is the 1-hour solid larvicide training. We know in the past it's kind of been boring, and we're trying not to put you guys to sleep here. So we kind of revamped it. There will be kind of fact checks that we're going to go through after each chapter, just to put an answer in the chat, just to kind of participate a little bit. And then, yeah, we'll kind of go through all of this. Our vector control program manager is Samantha Kerr out of Springfield. If you guys have any questions about grant funding, sending in West Nile virus data, tick collections, or anything else, she is your go-to person. Her or April Holmes, who is also in Samantha's office. Samantha also hosts vector program hours on a monthly basis, and I think during vector season, she does them every about 2 weeks. So that is a good source for updates, and if you guys have any questions to ask her, and if you want to be on that list for the vector program hours, all you have to do is contact Samantha, or you can contact me and I'll put you on those too. So Katie and I work out of our Westchester regional office. Here are all of our program staff members for Vector. You have me, Anna Buckus, which you guys will be sending in all this larvicide information. There will be multiple slides on what to send in to get your 1 hour larvicide certificate, but you will send that to my email, which is that anastasia.buckus. And then you have Katie Nelson, who is our public service administrator, and then Jaya and Sam, who also work in our program. This is what you guys will need to send to me. This is a copy of that solid mosquito larvicide training that will be sent to the Illinois Department of Agriculture following this completion of the presentation. IDPH will need the following information submitted to myself, anastasia.buckus, which my email will be also up at the end if you missed that in the previous slide. And I would like for you guys to send that information to me, hopefully by the end of this week into next week. I'm trying to get that all out to the Department of Agriculture. So I would need your first and last name, address, city, street, zip, telephone, date of birth, employer, and email. If you have multiple employees on here, say from DuPage County, you can put all of DuPage County participants in one email with all that information, and I will be sending all that out to Department of Agriculture. It will take a few days for them to send me a PDF version, which I could send back to you guys, and then the Department of Agriculture will send a paper copy to you with whatever address is on your information. Okay, let's get into this. This presentation is for the IAC section, Special Application of Solid Mosquito Larvicides, that allows individuals to apply specific mosquito larvicides without a formal license, provided they have completed this training. However, the exemption only applies if the product is labeled with a signal word caution and is a prepackaged solid like granule or briquette that is simply placed at the site. Additionally, the authorization is strictly limited to specific products covered in this training. We'll go through specific products at the end. And your solid mosquito larvicide training certification is only valid for the calendar year. So everyone who completed this last year in 2025 is no longer valid, and that is why you are taking this today to get the 2026 calendar year. If you have any questions about your certificates, you can always reach out to me. I can kind of be a liaison with the Department of Agriculture. Otherwise, you can also contact Department of Ag. Mosquito identification. So what is a mosquito? Well, a mosquito is a nuisance pest and deadly vector of disease. Mosquitoes are the world's deadliest animal, annually by transmitting diseases like malaria, dengue, Zika, yellow fever, etc. They are part of the Animalia kingdom. They are an arthropod, so they have an external skeleton, segmented body, and segmented appendages. They are part of the Insecta class, meaning they have 6 legs, 3 body regions, including the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. And they are a part of the Diptera order, meaning they are a fly with 2 wings. Mosquitoes are a little different because they have that long proboscis, scales on the wings, and their larvae come to the water surface for air. Here are a couple insects commonly confused with mosquitoes. Gnats, midges, crane flies, black flies, house flies. You can see the example of like a mosquito versus a crane fly. Crane flies usually have long legs. You can tell in this photo that are in this slide that the mosquito has that long proboscis. So when you're going out for any complaints and you have to identify which insect you guys are working with, it's great to keep in mind everything that is confused with mosquitoes. We have 3 Illinois species of interest for mosquitoes. You have your Culex species, Anopheles species, and Aedes species. We will go
through each species, their common names, diseases they transmit, breeding sites, and habitats later in the presentation. So here would be that fact check for mosquito identification. How many mosquito species of interest in Illinois are there? If you guys could throw your answer in the chat. Okay, well, there are 3 mosquito species of interest. They are the Aedes, Anopheles, and Culex. Next would be your mosquito life cycle. Mosquitoes go through a complete metamorphosis, meaning they start as an egg, move to a larva, pupa, and then emerge as an adult. Different species lay eggs in varying patterns and locations, and all larvae and pupa are found in aquatic conditions. First life stage is your eggs. So this is the Culex species, which most people know that common northern house mosquitoes, your Culex pipiens, they lay eggs in rafts of 40 to 400 eggs on the water's surface. Dependent on environmental conditions, they can hatch out in 3 to 5 days, and they are associated with temporary pools high in organic debris and sewage. They like the foul, smelly water. Here are a few habitats that the Culex like to hide out in. Your first one is the catch basin. This is a common targeted area for municipalities or mosquito abatements to treat as part of a good integrated pest management program, and this focuses on prevention. The second is like a stagnant pool that could have been abandoned during like a housing market crash or just overlooked at with moving. And then 3, they like culverts, roadside ditches, and swales. Your Anopheles species. Anopheles is the malaria mosquito. They lay eggs that float singly on the water surface. Dependent on environmental conditions, they hatch out in 3 to 5 days, and they are associated with permanent freshwater pools such as ponds, marshes, swamps with aquatic vegetation. Here are a few habitats. So you have a freshwater marsh, a permanent freshwater pond, and a rain barrel with fresh water in it. And then last is your Aedes species. They are a little different than the other 2 species because they lay eggs singly on damp soil or in containers above the waterline. Dependent on environmental conditions, or they can overwinter as eggs and can survive several years, and they're associated with floodwaters and artificial containers. And we will go into detail on specific Aedes species like the Aedes triceriatus, albopictus, vexans, and solicitans. Here are some habitats for your Aedes species, so your floodwater plains, abandoned tires, or your tree hole mosquitoes, which is that Aedes triceriatus. However, they will lay eggs anywhere there is standing water. So that first picture, you see a little water bottle cap, so small, yet there's stagnant water in there. Stagnant or ornamental ponds that lack natural predators or aeration, and like bird baths, should be emptied and cleaned weekly to disrupt the mosquito life cycle. That is also a good thing for your birds. The birds will appreciate you cleaning out a bird bath. Next is our larva stage. Larvae are called wigglers because they move in the water by wiggling. All mosquito larvae are aquatic. Mosquito larvae feed on organic debris and microorganisms in the water. In warm weather, they can develop in 5 to 10 days. And this is the key life stage in mosquito control. Most local health departments, municipalities, and MADs use larvicides to kill and disrupt the cycle during this stage. Using larvicides during other stages will not work effectively / they won't work at all. Here's how to distinguish different larva species. Your Anopheles versus that Culex and Aedes species. Anopheles lay parallel to the water surface. They have many palpate hairs and no elongated air tube. Whereas your Culex and Aedes species have that elongated air tube and they hang at an angle to the water surface. You will also see a presence or absence, dependent on species, of a small row of teeth on the air tube called the pecten. And they have a number and arrangement of hair tufts on the air tube that relates to the species. Next is your life stage 3, which is your pupa, also called tumblers, and will dive into the water when disturbed. All pupa are aquatic. They have rounded bodies with elongated abdomens. They can develop into adults in 3 days. They do not feed, and they breathe air through the tube protruding through water surface. Again, larvicides are not as effective at this time. If the water cannot be removed, it is important to return to the site to see if it can be treated to prevent breeding. Next is your adults. They emerge from pupa onto the water surface. Adults primarily feed on nectar. Only female mosquitoes require a blood meal. They need the protein in the blood for egg production. And they feed on birds, mammals, and sometimes reptiles. Here is your males versus female mosquitoes. Again, your males only feed on nectar. They live about 1 to 2 weeks. They have long palps and feathery antennae. And then your females, that first meal is on nectar. Then they start to feed on blood to lay eggs. They live about 2 to 6 weeks, short palps, and they have thread-like antennae. Your Culex and Anopheles adults can overwinter as inseminated females in culverts, caves, and under porches to survive freezing temperatures. They can travel short distances, less than a mile, and they're active from dusk until dawn. Knowing that your Culex and Anopheles adults can travel short distances, it's good to put that in your IPM approach so you know to stay close to the breeding site when trying to look for adults. Here's a little research that I've done back in like 2021, 2022. We went into tunnels underground and found a bunch of Culex mosquitoes. I believe we found approximately 300 mosquitoes in January at less than 10 degrees. And all the mosquitoes came back as West Nile virus negative. So they're just waiting out in the tunnels for that warmer weather. Moving on to Aedes adults, they can overwinter as eggs in damp soil. They can travel long distances, about 5 to 10 miles, dependent on species. Some species are active from dusk until dawn, while some are daytime biters, which we will get into in a few short slides. And when looking at Aedes adults, you want to broaden your IPM approach to enclose that 5 to 10 miles from that breeding sites while looking for those adults. So here's another fact check. How many stages do mosquitoes go through? And what is the key life stage in mosquito control? And you can put your answers in the chat. I cannot see the chat currently.
Looks like the majority of people are saying 4 larvae, 4 stages in larvae.
Awesome, that's correct. So yep, there's 4 stages of mosquito that mosquitoes go through that complete metamorphosis, your egg, larvae, pupa, and then adult. And that key life stage is the larva life stage. So you can kill them with larvicides. Awesome. All right, moving on to mosquitoes and their associated diseases. First species of importance for vector is that Culex mosquito or that northern house mosquito. They can transmit West Nile virus and St. Louis encephalitis virus. They prefer to lay eggs in stagnant water with organic debris, like catch basins, abandoned swimming pools, and clogged gutters. And they are active from dusk until dawn. So they carry West Nile virus, as we just mentioned. It's maintained in a mosquito-bird cycle. And West Nile virus has been detected in many bird species, but crows and blue jays are more susceptible to the disease and death from the virus. And humans, horses, and other mammals are dead end hosts. We're going to go through the symptoms of West Nile virus. This is very important to know because these are occupational exposures. If you are in the vector program at your local health department, municipality, or wherever your organization is, it's nice to know what to look for if you get bit by mosquitoes. So most people infected with West Nile virus do not develop any symptom whatsoever. Some people develop mild flu-like symptoms like fever with headache, body aches, joint pain, vomiting, diarrhea, and rash. And then some people develop a severe neurological illness that results in hospitalization or in some cases death. And that includes neck stiffness, disorientation, coma, tremors, vision loss, and paralysis. Symptoms can start 2 to 6 days after being bitten by an infected mosquito. Anyone can develop mild or severe illnesses if infected with West Nile virus. Some people are at higher risk of the severe illness, and it increases with age, certain chronic medical conditions like cancer, diabetes, high blood pressure, or a weakened immune system, including for people who take medications that may weaken their immune system. Most people infected with West Nile virus are believed to have a lifelong immunity or protection from getting the disease again. Here is our 2025 Illinois West Nile virus surveillance data. So this is data collected from local health departments, mosquito abatement districts, the University of Illinois Veterinarian Diagnostic Lab, and regional IDPH staff. So overall, 73 counties were positive for West Nile virus from mosquitoes, birds, horses, and humans. And all of this data can be found on our website. Samantha and April down in Springfield take your data once you send it in and put it all together on these fancy little graphs, and it's updated weekly. Here's another numbers at a glance. There's like 150 human cases, 10 human deaths, 65 years was that median age of human cases, 4 years being the youngest, 91 being the oldest. Again, 73 counties positive, and there was almost 4,000 positive mosquito batches. So this is, again, all on our vector control and surveillance website for IDPH and gets updated weekly. All right, moving on. Another species of importance for vector is the Aedes tricereatus mosquito, which is the tree hole mosquito. They may transmit La Crosse encephalitis virus. They prefer to lay eggs in natural and artificial containers like tree holes, buckets, watering cans, and they can be active during the day. Currently, they do not carry the pathogen in Illinois, but we are still keeping an eye on surveillance and testing them so we know for sure. Next is your Aedes albopictus, which is that Asian tiger mosquito. They may transmit La Crosse encephalitis virus in Illinois. In other parts of the world, it transmits dengue, chikungunya, and Zika virus, and they prefer to lay eggs in artificial containers like tires and buckets, and they are also active during the day. Here is a difference between your Aedes albopictus and Aedes aegypti mosquito. Both are daytime biting black mosquitoes with white markings. Aedes albopictus are currently everywhere in Illinois, and Aedes aegypti is known to be in Illinois, and if you do find it, you should report it to IDPH right away. And then to know the difference between the two, Aedes aegypti has a lyre shape on its back, and albopictus has a single line. If you guys have any questions about identifying an albopictus versus aegypti, you can always reach out to IDPH, whether that's myself or Samantha and April in Springfield. And again, just going through mosquito-borne diseases like Zika, malaria, yellow fever, and dengue. We'll kind of get into a little bit of each disease. So your malaria is transmitted by Anopheles mosquitoes. Typical flu-like symptoms, severe cases may lead to jaundice, seizures, coma, or death. Malaria was widespread in Illinois up until the 1920s, and it was mostly in southern Illinois. IDPH started early on mosquito control techniques to get rid of the malaria. And again, malaria has been eradicated from local transmission in Illinois since 1950s. And there are 2 vaccines approved by the World Health Organization, but they are for children under 1 year, and it's not available in the US. In 2023, CDC received reports of 10 cases of locally acquired malaria in 4 states, with 9 cases caused by the P. viax among people with no travel history in Florida, Texas, and Arkansas. Within months of identifying these cases, CDC experts quickly developed a new genetic sequencing tool to determine the origins of the parasites. So this is good to just keep up with news, especially if you're traveling outside of the United States, and just keeping up with mosquito-related diseases. Next is chikungunya. And this is a risk for travelers flying out of the country, but there's a vaccine travelers can take. This is carried by your Aedes albopictus and Aedes aegypti. Though we find these mosquitoes in Illinois, they are again not known to carry any pathogens. Oh no, that's for the next slide, sorry. All right, and then for your dengue, according to the CDC in 2024, more than 13 million cases of dengue fever were reported in North, Central, and South America and the Caribbean. Multiple Pacific islands have declared dengue outbreaks in 2025 also. Your dengue is carried by Aedes albopictus and Aedes aegypti, and there is a vaccine available for U.S. territories in children under 18 years old. Next is Zika. There's been no approved vaccines. They're carried by Aedes albopictus and aegypti. And again, we find those mosquitoes in Illinois, but they are not known to carry these pathogens. In the U.S., for this little graph on the left here, in the U.S., the color shown represents the known presence of the mosquitoes that can transmit Zika, but there are no reported cases. The darker shaded areas represent current or past Zika transmissions. And then this one's about yellow fever and just how it is spread. This can be a risk for travelers flying to Africa or South America, but there is a vaccine travelers can take. This is carried by the Aedes aegypti mosquito. And though we find it in Illinois, they do not carry this pathogen. Okay, moving on to nuisance or just annoying mosquitoes. So all of these are known not to transmit human pathogens in Illinois. Starting with your Aedes vexans or your floodwater mosquito, they prefer to lay eggs in soil that will become flooded. They're active from dusk till dawn, and they fly long distances, that 5 to 10 miles. And then your Aedes sollicitans, which is your salt marsh mosquito, they prefer to lay eggs in salt water, like oil sites, mining areas, and road salt storage areas. They're active during twilight, and they also fly long distances. So here we'll do a fact check. Again, I cannot see the chat. But what mosquito carries West Nile virus? And true or false, humans can pass West Nile virus to each other.
Looking at the results, it looks like the mosquito that carries is Culex. I'm sorry if I'm saying that wrong. And then false for if humans can pass West Nile to each other.
Correct. Your Culex mosquitoes carries West Nile virus, and humans are a dead end host for West Nile virus, so you cannot pass it to other people. Awesome. Okay, moving on to mosquito larva control. Doing a little mosquito surveillance for larvae and pupa. What would you need? Well, you're going to need standing water with little to no wave action, a 4-inch diameter white dipper, and some other useful items include waders, pipettes, jars, and vials. Waders are good, but not always useful if you're not getting into the water. And then pipettes and jars so you can take it back to the lab and identify it so you know what you're looking for or looking at. And now how do you collect? So you don't want to disturb the water. You don't want to cast a shadow over the water. If vegetation is present, you want to look near clumps at the water's edge. And once you dip in and collect some water and you look into it and see larvae, again, you want to place in jars to identify later. And why are we looking at the control of mosquito larvae? Well, this is the #1 way to kill larvae is to remove the water source. You want to identify a target mosquito species so you know which larvicide to be using. You want to know your breeding area and then treat with that appropriate larvicide. Mapping and tracking areas of treatment is really good for your surveillance and IPM approach. Rechecking about 1 to 2 weeks after applying the larvicide is good to go through and make sure that larvicide is working and doing what it's supposed to be doing. And then remember that larvae feed and pupa do not, so you always want to use larvicides when you see larvae. This is multiple ways local health departments, mosquito abatements, municipalities go about to treat larvae. So that first picture is like a little oil can, put oil on the water surface so that the Culex and Aedes species can't breathe through their air tube. That middle top photo, it looks like a briquette that this guy is throwing in. You can use liquid larvicide. A lot of people use backpack sprayer with granular to shoot at huge areas like this bottom right photo, a huge abandoned tire site. And then a lot of bigger mosquito abatements in areas like in Florida and Texas, they use aerial larviciding with planes. And the new thing is using drones to larvicide in like forest preserves that can be treated or big area floodwater plains and whatsoever. So there's multiple ways to control mosquito larvae. Again, after that treatment, going out and doing a surveillance about 1 to 2 weeks to make sure that the larvicide is effective. You can also possibly locate any locations that might have been missed during the first go around. You can find out if you're having insecticide resistance or if there's a change in species. Here's some personal protection that you can go about when doing your vector program, or if you're just hanging out in the summer at night at a baseball game or in your backyard. Some cultural ways is to avoid dusk and dawn activities. That is hard because in the summer we like a nice cool night and enjoying the weather. So you wearing light colored long sleeve of clothing will work. Some biological ways would be replace clothing containing any body odors with fresh clothes. Again, mosquitoes are attracted to smelly smells. So if you're smelling, then the mosquitoes are going to know that and come towards you faster. And then a chemical way would be using EPA registered insect repellents that might have DEET or picaridin, etc. If you are using DEET, the recommended percentage for adults is about 20 to 30%. And then in kids, it's less than 10% of DEET. And you want to make sure you're applying this to your clothing and not to your actual skin. And if you do get it on your skin, to wash it off with soap and water. Some property control that you could do at home or public outreach in your area. You can remove containers that hold standing water, clean gutters and downspouts so they're not clogged. Again, refreshing that bird bath weekly. Maintain pools with chemicals and ponds with like an aerator or some kind of bubbler. Remove old tires. If you can't remove the old tire, then drilling a hole at the bottom so it can't collect water. And then repair and replace ripped screens so they can't come inside. Here's another little fact check for mosquito larvae. What are 3 ways to prevent mosquitoes from your property? You do not have to read off different ways. I know we talked about a few, so just knowing about up to 3 ways to prevent mosquitoes from your properties is a good takeaway. Here are a couple fun facts about mosquitoes. Again, we're trying to liven this presentation up, so here's a couple fun facts. Mosquitoes have been on Earth since the time of dinosaurs, so over 100 million years ago. Mosquitoes' wings beat 300 to 600 times per second. Mosquitoes can detect CO2 or carbon dioxide from 75 feet away. And there has been a lot of research in the Chicagoland area on adulticide and larvicide resistance. So again, here's a little snapshot of some articles within the last couple of years evaluating insecticide resistance in mosquitoes. They're not too long, they're fun little quick reads just to go through. Next, we're going to be talking about ticks. Here's a little chart. I'm not going to go through each pathogen just because I don't think you guys want me trying to pronounce all of these pathogens. But if you want to take a quick screenshot of it or use your phone camera to take a photo, this is a great little chart to know. It goes by tick, pathogen, habitat, and peak activity. I know Samantha has put out this chart in the past, but we added it to this presentation here. So your black-legged tick or your deer tick, they typically carry like Lyme disease and Powassan virus. They like wooded forested terrain areas with elevation. They need deer and game trails with plenty of leaf litter. And they're active March through May and October through November. Your Lone Star tick, they like second growth forest and edge habitats with undergrowth such as honeysuckle, and they are active April through July. And then your American dog tick, which carries Rocky Mountain spotted fever. They like that forest edge habitat, grasslands, and uncut lawns. It can also be found along walking trails and roadways. They're active April through July. And then the Gulf Coast tick. They like grasslands and meadows and roadside ditches and field access roads, and they are active May through July. We're going to talk a little bit about Powassan virus just because we got our first human case back in September last year. It is carried by the black-legged tick, or that deer tick. Symptoms include fever, headache, vomiting, and weakness. And then severe cases, you'll get meningitis, encephalitis, loss of coordination, and seizures. This disease is rare according to the CDC, but it's increasing. There are no vaccines to prevent virus and no medicines to treat. But this reiterates the importance of diseases in ticks and how you are taking steps to prevent tick bites. IDPH has an interactive tick-borne disease dashboard where you can go through each disease. It goes through like an overview of what tick carries that disease, what to look for when it comes to symptoms, and then a map of tick collections and human cases. So we'll kind of go through Lyme disease. So here you see I clicked into Lyme disease, that overview, Lyme disease in ticks, and then Lyme disease in humans. So I clicked on Lyme disease in ticks dashboard. So here is just an overview, and it says to click a county. So I clicked on Cook County. So we can see here that it is carried by the black-legged tick. And last year, in the 689 black-legged ticks that were collected, 269 were positive for Lyme disease. This is kind of a little fun dashboard. You can go through all the other diseases and click through other counties and figure out how many ticks were collected from that county and how many were positive. And again, Samantha and April keep a weekly update on this dashboard also. And then our concern with ticks is because they spread somewhat randomly. They have a long length of time to establish and be recognized in the medical community. Habitat invasion, and it's a good identification of new diseases. IDPH also has tick ID cards. If you don't know what that is, you can contact Samantha, April, or anyone here out of the Westchester Regional Office, and we can send you tick ID cards. And it comes just with like a common Illinois ticks. There's 4 on here, and then where to check yourself on your body for ticks and how to remove a tick the correct way.
Okay, now we're going to turn over to everyone's favorite part, which is the label review. It's required as we do these presentations to include all solid larvicide labels and point out certain things about each label as we begin to issue certificates. So I'll try to move through the labels as quickly as possible, as most of you have seen this part of the presentation before. Safety requirements. It's important to remember that even when you're using the same larvicide as prior seasons, you do have to refamiliarize yourself with the label prior to use. Now is a good opportunity as you're making your larvicide orders or deciding what type of larvicide that you're giving out, that everyone review those labels, as there can be changes. But it's important that when you are applying any solid larvicides that you're sure to follow the label and the SDS sheets that come with the product. As you've heard me say multiple times, the label is a legal document, it is the law, and it must be followed. As far as toxicity of larvicides, just because a larvicide typically have a high LD50, when I'm referring to the LD50, that means that half of the tested subject population dies from the effects of ingesting so many milligrams of concentrated material per kilogram of body weight. So here's some examples listed, and it kind of goes to show you that as you're moving towards the bottom of the list with the lower LD50s, what can be more toxic, and then you're looking at Alticid and BTI is much less toxic than certain dosages of caffeine or sugar. Like I mentioned, each product should come with labels and safety data sheets, and they should be reviewed. SDS sheets contain additional information sometimes not located on the label, such as health risks and effects, some additional first aid, fire protection, spill control, toxicity, and disposal requirements. But either way, once again, the label is the law. So I'm just kind of going to go over an overview of the parts, what will be contained on most of the labels that you'll be looking at. Every label will mostly have the same categories on them, and they're listed here. The label is a document that should be carried with you and with the product when you are in the field. It's helpful to have the information available. As a lot of you are field workers, you can understand that you may be approached by a citizen or someone who is concerned with your application. So having this information on hand is very important. And it's also important to remember that being an informed inspector or applicator is part of a good IPM program. Again, this is a chart that we've listed here before. It's important to know what kind of larvicide you are using, its mode of action, and primary uses. Knowing the modes of action of the larvicide will help you in back checking to ensure that your application was effective. For example, if you're using an insect growth regulator, such as methoprin, you will continue to observe active larvae. This does not mean that the product that you are using did not work, because this action occurs in the pupal stage. The pupa will not develop into adults. Also, remember too, if you are at an application site and you're already observing pupa, although it will not be effective to treat that area with larvae at that time to eliminate that pupa, it is important to remember that an additional application may be needed if this is a site that cannot be eliminated, like an in-ground pool. You're not going to be able to potentially get an order to drain the water. So an application could be necessary at this time to avoid future breeding of mosquitoes. These are just some of the common larvicides that most people are using, and these are the labels that we will go through. The first one, the active ingredient is methoprin. This active ingredient, it has a molecule that closely resembles an insect juvenile hormone. It works by disrupting the molting cycle, and when applied to aquatic habitats, it causes the mosquitoes to die at the pupal stage, and therefore they do not mature into results. There's a picture here that kind of shows the effects and what it has on a developing mosquito. Such examples are alticid and meadowlarva. And this is where we're going to go through different parts of the label and just point out some of the highlighted stuff. I'll go through this pretty quickly so we can ensure that we end on time. As discussed, the active ingredient is shown right here. That's important to know. The precautionary statement on this one goes over the hazards to both human and animals. This label includes first aid recommendations in case the product gets on your skin, in your eyes, or on your clothing. Sorry, I skipped one. In the introduction, this label lists the product should be effective for 30 days under typical environmental conditions. So keep in mind, if you have periods of heavy rain, you may need to do some back checking to ensure that the larvicide that you applied is still working. Directions for use in this one discuss only removing the product from the container directly before use. The directions on this label specify that applications are to be made to small bodies of water. This product would be useful for applications such as catch basins, storm sewers, small pools, ponds, roadside ditches, ornamental ponds, and swimming pools. This would not be a good product to choose to use if you are trying to treat large bodies of stagnant water. I like this one and the chart that they have listed here. For this application, knowing the size and the depth of the catch basins that you are applying to is important. They can vary very greatly even within a single municipality, especially when there's aging infrastructure. Many public works departments and mosquito abatement districts do have mapping programs that can contain this information. So when training, let's say like a seasonal intern, it's important to reiterate that the number of briquettes may change based on the location of the catch basin. A little bit about storage and disposal. Almost all of them will state that you should store your product in a cool and dry place. On this label, this is for an extended release briquette, and it discusses application rates for specific species, showing identification of the target mosquito for which the product is being used. In the general directions for these water-soluble pouches, it notes that the pouches are sensitive to water, so storage conditions are going to be especially important. You would not want to store this product under a leaky pipe. You would want to make sure that it's stored off the ground so it has no potential for water damage. And then I think it's also important to note, in addition to storing your product in a cool and dry place, anytime you're storing larvicides or any pesticides, the storage area should be kept in an orderly and clean fashion. The application directions for this meadowlarva specifies that this product can be applied to sites that normally flood during dry conditions. For this type of application, records should be maintained about the date and the conditions during the application, as the effectiveness of the application can vary based on site conditions. This slide focuses on the specific site applications and application rate. The next active ingredients that we're going to talk about is your Bacillus sphaericus. This product, or this active ingredient, is ingested by mosquitoes and releases a protein in the midgut of the larva. This protein binds to a receptor in the midgut and causes enough damage to kill the mosquito. The active ingredient is listed here. When you're going through and reviewing the first aid associated with products, note that additional numbers may be listed if you need to seek immediate emergency medical treatment. If you're calling the poison control hotline, it is important to have the product and the label with you. They will be asking you questions if you are in sound condition to answer them. The poison control number here, or the poison control number, the national one, is 1-800-222-1222. I think it's a good number to keep in any area that you're storing product. The storage and disposal section of this label is similar to others, that the product should be stored in a clean and dry place and containers should not be reused. In the application directions, this points out that Vectalex can be applied to aquatic areas that contain fish and other wildlife. So knowing what is present when you are applying anything to stagnant water will be helpful in determining what product you want to use. A few of the highlighted areas here include that the product should be used within 1 day of opening a package, and the reapplication period is 1 to 4 weeks. The next active ingredients are our BTIs, and examples include 4-star mosquito dunks and Vectobac. BTIs produce a protein crystal during fermentation, which are ingested by larvae as they feed. The crystals dissolve and they are converted by specific enzymes into protein molecules that bind with receptor sites on the mosquito gut wall. That was a mouthful. This is just showing the active ingredient for one of the products that was previously listed. And these are just additional examples of labels related to BTIs. This one points out the manufacturer's information. It's important to remember that if you have any questions, calling the manufacturer is the best course of action, and not asking a fellow coworker or anyone else, because you want to get your information directly from the manufacturer. This label specifies or provides application rates for evaporative coolers, which is an application I have not previously used in the past, but I thought that was kind of interesting. And this also talks about more household uses. This is a product that can commonly be found in most commercial stores. This is your Vectobac label, and it discusses back checking as it refers to the observation of larval numbers at the pre-treatment threshold level. So all of these labels are very similar, but each one has something specific on there, so make sure you're reading those labels again. We also have products with an active ingredients of BTIs and BSs, and listed here are all of the examples. Note the signal word on this one is caution. That is the only product that should be applied under this larvicide applicator training. More precautionary statements and directions for use, all very similar to the ones that we've already discussed. Sorry, there's a lot of slides on the labels. Active ingredients, not the last one, almost the last one. Spinosad. This alters the function of specific insect receptors and causes continuous nervous impulses. These impulses will cause paralysis and death. This is a natural T30 label. This label references the importance of following good IPM programs. Note the restriction on this one, directing that applications should not be made to natural or artificial containers of water intended for consumption by people, animals, or livestock. Therefore, if using this product, it would be important to consider, if you have a similar breeding site, alternative methods of control, such as emptying those containers if possible. Unlike the other labels reviewed, this label does allow for the refilling of a container only with a spinosad pesticide formulation. When using the extended release product, please ensure that your application will last for the duration of needed control or determine if reapplication is necessary. This specific label says that it will last for 180 days. All right, and our last one. The last active ingredient is pyriproxfen. Sorry, pyriproxfen. Like methoprene, this is an active ingredient that disrupts the life cycle at the molting stage. Similar is a common product that is on the market now for use. And I'm going to wrap up all of these labels and move to the last part, which is just our public outreach. So I just wanted to note that these are some of the platforms in which we post social media during the vector season. Our social media team will post Fight the Bite Friday information, and you are welcome to use that and repost it with your own caption. Here's just a couple of examples of some of the information that we put out there. As this program has moved along, it's important to consider that social media can be a very important part of your vector program. You want to keep your community engaged. Additional resources for social media posts can also be found on the CDC's website, which I recommend checking out in addition to ours. This is some of the information that we have on IDPH's website. These door hangers are something that we are able to request in the past, so if you do need any additional resources, please feel free to reach out to one of the regional offices or our central office. This is just a site that you're not going to need for the applications that you're doing, but anytime you're doing any sort of vector work, you want to be aware of pollinators in the area, and you can locate those who are registered on DriftWatch. And then upcoming events, we're likely to add one more additional 1-hour applicator training virtually. The vector surveillance spring training will be announced. And I also wanted to remind anyone that did not fill out a survey, Samantha had sent out an email survey on February 17th that requested updated vector program staff contact information and ideas for education and outreach. If you have not responded to that email, please do so this week. And then we will be hosting an in-person training clinic in Rockford. Additional upcoming events is just National Mosquito Control Awareness Week, as declared by the American Mosquito Control Association. Those dates are not out for 2026, but it also makes for some good social media posts. If anyone did not know, World Mosquito Day, I did not know this until last month, is August 20th. And it was established in 1897 when Sir Ronald Ross made a discovery about the female Anopheles mosquitoes and its transmission of malaria. He revolutionized the understanding of this disease, and then that led to increased awareness about malaria prevention. All right, and the final slide, and the most important for anyone that does need to obtain their solid 1-hour solid larvicide applicator certificate. I'm going to leave this up for a second. This has Anna's email. You can email myself as well. And this is the information that we need included in the email in order to submit to IDA for your certificate. And then once I close out the presentation, I can put her email in the chat as well.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you so much, Katie. Thank you so much, Anna, for your presentation. Um, Lenore, I know that there was something that you also, but did anyone have any questions before we kind of wrap up? I didn't see any during the presentation. So, Lenore, I can turn it over to you, and then maybe it might take a while for people to post in questions, and we can do that. And then, Katie, you can stop sharing your screen whenever.
Okay.
So thank you all so much for attending today. I look forward to seeing you all again on Thursday. Those were great presentations, a lot of meat for the mind, things to think about. I want to remind you all to fill out your evaluation forms and your CEU applications and get those to Heather. And I will see you all again on Thursday.
Hey, awesome. And it looks like there are some people that are asking for that information. Katie, I don't know if you're still there. That was on the slides. Or
I had posted it. Do you want me to share again? Here,
yeah,
see if I can screenshot
I
it and
can't
put it.
remember what they are, but I'll go ahead and I can type it out too to put it in the chat so everyone has it as
So
well.
it's name, work address, date of birth, telephone number, employer, and your email. And then I did put Anna's contact information in the chat.
All right, perfect. I went ahead and put that text in there, so if anyone can see it in the chat, recommend copying, pasting, and then Anna's email is in here as well. I did see that too. Okay. All righty then. Okay, if there is nothing else, we finished just on time. That's great. Love when that happens. I will see everyone on Thursday for our next round of presenters, starting again right at 1 p.m. And if there's nothing else, I hope everyone has a good rest of your day. I will leave the chat open up for a little bit in case anyone needs to copy and paste, but I'll go ahead and end our recording session for today then. Thank you, and everyone have a good day.